Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. This time we're going to be tackling a pretty fascinating topic, the whole idea of consciousness and, is there a soul? Does it stick around after death? All that good stuff. And we're going to be looking at a Chinese text that really dives into some pretty wild ideas, especially those from Roger Penrose. He's a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and he's got this really interesting, albeit a little controversial, concept of quantum souls. Plus, this text also looks back at some of the ways people have tried to understand the soul throughout history, including one experiment that actually tried to weigh the soul. It's a fascinating story, even if it's a bit flawed scientifically. So yeah, we're going to unpack some complex science, look at things from different angles, and really get you thinking about life, death, and the universe. All that fun stuff.
You know, what immediately grabbed my attention in this text was how it defines life. It goes way beyond the usual stuff about cells and DNA. And it really puts a lot of emphasis on consciousness.
Yeah.
Like it's this core element. It even compares consciousness to dark matter, which I thought was really interesting. They're both things we can't see directly, but we know they're there because of their effects.
That is a great comparison. And the text takes it even further, right?
Yeah.
It suggests that all life, even bacteria, has some level of consciousness. It's just that the complexity varies.
Exactly. And that gets you thinking, doesn't it? Could consciousness be like this fundamental property of the universe? Not just a byproduct of brains like ours, but something more basic, something more widespread.
Wow, that's a big idea. And it brings us to Roger Penrose, who you mentioned earlier. He's done groundbreaking work on black holes, often with Stephen Hawking.
Right. Penrose and Hawking really changed how we think about black holes. But for our deep dive today, the key thing is his orchestrated objective reduction theory. It's a mouthful, I know. But basically, he developed it with Stuart Hameroff. And they suggest that consciousness comes from quantum processes happening in these tiny structures in the brain called microtubules.
So hold on, we're talking about quantum mechanics, the science of the super tiny, actually playing a role in our consciousness. That's where things get really interesting and maybe a little hard to wrap your head around. Can you break down what orchestrated objective reduction actually means?
Sure. So objective reduction is Penrose's idea that quantum states in the brain, which are normally in this state of superposition, meaning they exist in multiple possibilities at the same time, they collapse into a single definite state. And according to Penrose, this collapse isn't just random, it's orchestrated by a specific biological process within these microtubules. It's this orchestrated collapse that creates our conscious experience.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. But how does this tie into the idea of a soul that lives on after death?
Well, this is where it gets really mind-blowing. Penrose believes that this quantum information inside the microtubules, it doesn't get destroyed when we die, it gets released. This information, which is basically our consciousness, could exist outside our physical body, maybe even travel beyond this world as we know it.
That raises a huge question. Could our consciousness actually be separate from our bodies? And maybe even continue after we die? It's a pretty amazing idea. But before we get too deep into the quantum stuff, let's switch gears for a minute. I've got a historical story I think you'll find pretty fascinating.
Sounds good to me. What is it?
We're going back to 1901, when a doctor named Duncan McDougall decided to try something pretty bold. He wanted to weigh the soul.
Weigh the soul? How did he even try to do that?
Well, he set up this experiment where he very carefully measured the weight of patients right at the moment of death, hoping to see a change that he could say was the soul leaving the body.
That's certainly ambitious. Maybe a little out there, but ambitious for sure. So what did he find?
In one case, he saw a 21-gram weight loss right when the patient died. And of course, he said that was the soul departing. It caused quite a stir, to say the least.
I bet it did. But I'm guessing there were problems with how he did the experiment.
You're right. Other scientists quickly pointed out flaws. The weight change could have been all sorts of things, like fluids evaporating, changes in breathing, or even just problems with the scales he was using. And sadly, his later attempts to actually photograph the soul using special lighting and x-rays didn't really pan out.
So trying to prove the soul exists scientifically, at least using those methods, didn't work. But that doesn't mean people gave up on the idea of capturing the soul, or at least its essence, visually. And that's where Semyon Kirlian comes in. He was a Soviet technician, and back in the 1930s, he developed something called Kirlian photography.
Ah, Kirlian photography. Those pictures with the colorful glowing auras around people and things. What was Kirlian actually trying to capture with that technique?
Kirlian thought he was capturing the energy field of living things, like a visual representation of their life force, or maybe even their soul. His photos show these bright, glowing patterns, and they seem to change depending on the person's emotional or physical state.
So did Kirlian think he'd actually photographed the soul?
It's hard to say for sure. He definitely saw his work as proof of some kind of bioenergy or life force that goes beyond the body. But whether he thought that was the same as the soul is up for debate. What's interesting is that some researchers, like Konstantin Kortkov, have used their own versions of Kirlian photography, and they claim to have captured images of the soul leaving the body at death.
Those are some pretty wild claims. But do scientists generally agree that these images are showing something real? Or is it just normal physical stuff?
Most scientists are skeptical. Kirlian photos are definitely eye-catching, but there's no widely accepted proof that they show anything beyond known physical processes. Things like electrical discharges or how light interacts with moisture and gases.
So we've looked at attempts to weigh the soul, photograph its energy field, and even explore the quantum world of the brain. What other ways have people tried to understand consciousness and whether it can exist outside the body?
Well, there's one more area that's really intriguing, especially when you consider Penrose's theories. And that's near-death experiences, or NDEs.
Now that's where things get really mind-blowing. Tell me more about those and how they connect to the idea of a soul or consciousness that might exist outside the body.
Near-death experiences they're these profound subjective experiences that people report after they've almost died. They often involve feelings of leaving their body, seeing a bright light, or even encountering loved ones who've passed away.
I've heard some pretty incredible stories about NDEs, and what's fascinating is Penrose's theories might actually offer a scientific way to understand them.
Yeah, that's the exciting part. Penrose suggests that during these close calls with death, the quantum information in those microtubules we talked about, it could temporarily leave the body, like a quick quantum trip for your consciousness.
Wow, so you're saying our consciousness could detach from our bodies, go somewhere else, and then come back. That's a pretty wild thought.
It is pretty wild, and it leads to an even bigger question. Could consciousness exist not just outside the body, but outside our physical reality completely? Which brings us to the multiverse.
The multiverse.
Yeah.
You mean the idea that there are more dimensions than just the three we experience? That's usually science fiction stuff. Is there any real science behind it?
There is. Some big names in physics, like Edward Witten. He's a leader in string theory. He believes that the math of string theory points to the existence of these higher dimensions.
So maybe the multiverse isn't just something we made up, but how does this connect to consciousness and the soul?
This is where things get super speculative, but also super interesting. Some scientists think that consciousness might actually come from these higher dimensions, and then it projects into our three-dimensional world.
You're saying our minds could be linked to some kind of cosmic consciousness in the multiverse. Now that's mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing, and it raises the possibility that what we think of as individual souls could actually be projections of this higher dimensional consciousness.
That's a bold idea. Are we getting into reincarnation territory here?
It might not be as crazy as it sounds. Remember, our text even suggests that these higher dimensional souls, if that's what they are, they might act as a kind of universal law that keeps the cosmos in balance.
So like a cosmic karma, making sure everything stays in equilibrium.
Exactly. And when you think about it, these concepts of consciousness coming from higher dimensions, they actually line up with ancient beliefs about reincarnation and the cyclical nature of life and death.
It's amazing how modern physics seems to be finding common ground with ancient wisdom. That connection between science and spirituality is always fascinating.
It is fascinating, but it's really important to remember that these are all very speculative ideas. We're right at the edge of what we know about consciousness and the universe.
And that's what makes this whole deep dive so exciting. We're exploring the limits of human knowledge, asking the big questions, and challenging ourselves to think beyond our everyday view of reality.
Absolutely. And maybe by doing that, we can gain a deeper appreciation for just how profound and interconnected everything really is.
So after all these mind-bending ideas, where do we stand? If consciousness can actually exist beyond the body, and maybe even in other dimensions, does that change how we think about the meaning of life? What's our purpose?
That's a question each of us has to wrestle with on our own. But what I find really thought-provoking is this. If consciousness is more than just physical, it could mean that it can interact with other forms of consciousness, or even influence things in our world.
Like some kind of cosmic connection, where our thoughts and intentions can ripple out and affect the whole universe.
Exactly. Imagine the possibilities if we could tap into that connection, this web of consciousness that might be all around us.
It's both awe-inspiring and humbling at the same time.
It is, and it really highlights how important it is to be aware, to be compassionate, and to take responsibility for our thoughts and actions. Because they might have effects that go far beyond what we can see.
This has been an incredible journey. From the tiny world of microtubules to the vastness of the multiverse, we've explored some truly profound and challenging ideas. What stands out to you as the most compelling or intriguing part of all this?
It's the idea that our consciousness might be more than just a product of our physical brains, that it might be connected to something larger, something beyond our current comprehension, if that's true. What does that mean for how we live our lives, how we interact with each other, and how we care for our planet?
Those are some really profound questions, and I don't think there are easy answers, but that's kind of the beauty of it all, isn't it? We get to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep expanding our understanding of what it means to be human in this vast and mysterious universe.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to continue your own exploration. Dive deeper into the topics that sparked your interest. Seek out different perspectives. And never stop asking those big questions. Who knows what incredible discoveries await you on your journey?
And who knows what mysteries we'll unravel together on our next deep dive. Until then, keep those minds open and those questions flowing. For me, it's this whole idea of like cutting-edge science, meeting these ancient philosophical and spiritual ideas. I mean, we've got Nobel Prize winners talking about quantum souls and physicists exploring consciousness in other dimensions. These are ideas that would have been laughed at by mainstream science not too long ago. And yet, they kind of echo these ancient beliefs about the soul, reincarnation, a universal consciousness. It's like science is finally catching up to what people have been saying for centuries.
Yeah, it's definitely a fascinating convergence, and I think it speaks to this deep human need to understand our place in the universe, the nature of our existence and what happens after we die. It seems like this drive to explore these big questions is just part of who we are.
And what's really exciting is that these questions aren't just stuck in philosophy or religion anymore. Science is giving us the tools and the frameworks to really investigate these mysteries.
This deep dive has really shown that. I mean, we went from the subatomic world of quantum mechanics to the vastness of the multiverse, all to try and understand consciousness and whether it can exist outside the body.
It's been an amazing journey, and I hope it's been as thought-provoking for our listeners as it has been for us.
If there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's that sense of wonder and curiosity about the universe and your place in it. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and don't be afraid to challenge what you think is possible.
We've covered so much today, and I know it might take some time to really process it all. What really stood out to you? What questions are still on your mind?
For me, it's the idea that our consciousness might be more than just our brains, that it could be connected to something bigger, something we can't even grasp yet. If that's true, then how should we live our lives? How should we treat each other? How should we take care of this planet?
Those are huge questions, and I don't think there are any easy answers. But that's the beauty of it, right? We get to keep exploring, keep learning, keep growing our understanding of what it means to be human in this incredible, mysterious universe.
Absolutely. So to everyone listening, keep that exploration going. Dig deeper into what interests you. Look for different perspectives, and never stop asking those big questions. Who knows what amazing things you'll discover along the way?
And who knows what mysteries we'll tackle together on our next deep dive. Until then, keep those minds open and stay curious.